after the whole event happened, I had several people ask me, how come I didn't shoot him? How come I didn't shoot him? And it was just kind of, I didn't think I had to. I mean, I know I could have. I know I would have been within my right to do that. I just didn't feel that he wanted to shoot me. I mean, because if he wanted to shoot me, he would have shot me. I was clearly within his range, and I had no cover. He clearly could have shot me if he wanted to.
Gerry, thank you for being here today. By way of introduction, I wanted to provide a brief overview of your law enforcement career. You started with the Darien Illinois Police Department in August of 1985. During the course of your career, you served as a patrol officer, detective, patrol sergeant, and commander. As a commander, you were tasked with overseeing the agency's patrol and investigative functions. Your collateral duties included field training officer, accident reconstructionist, SWAT operator and assistant team leader, Canine unit supervisor, and emergency management coordinator. You retired from the Darien Police Department in June of 2019. Gerry, thank you for agreeing to share your story.
You're welcome.
What was your childhood like?
I had a good childhood. I was born in Chicago, and we grew up in Park Ridge, Illinois, which is just outside of O'Hare, if you will. I have 5 other siblings, and a good old Italian Catholic family. We got along well with the family, our cousins. We were a good family unit. I had a good upbringing. It was very positive, very family oriented.
What did you do after high school?
After high school, again, that's the time where I was planning a way to go to college and still haven't really decided on a career yet. And I was hemming and hawing about what I was going to take in college, and I ended up going to a local junior college to try to get my feet wet and help me make that decision.
And what did you end up studying?
Well, I went in with the intent to go into business, and prior to that, in my years before then, they say that the people who often become police officers there's either some lineage to it, or they have contacts with the police that kind of guide them in that direction. I had both. So when I was in 8th grade, I got a job at a local hot dog stand in Park Ridge, and it just so happened is in that hot dog stand, besides having good food, Park Ridge police would always come in. They were always in there because we gave them discounts on food. So cops being who they are, they always come in and get the deals on the food. So just over that time, you start talking to the police and seeing how human they are and how funny they are and some of the stories they have. It really piqued my interest. And they also had an Explorer program, which is a branch of the Boy Scouts, if you will. And so I got involved in that, and that kind of opened my eyes a little bit more. And as far as the lineage, my oldest brother, Mark, was involved in law enforcement. And just talking to him and watching him, and when I got 18, I did some ride-alongs with him, and again, it really piqued my curiosity. So as luck would have it, I geared towards the law enforcement side and not so much the business side.
So you ended up at the Darien Police Department ultimately. Was that a purposeful choice, or was it kind of a shotgun approach of testing at several agencies?
That was testing several agencies, and like everybody else, you're going out there testing anybody who's offering, you're testing. Again, this was back in 85, 84, 85. So I was going all over the place in Illinois to test. I believe I took like 11 tests out there, and I was offered a job at the same time with Darien PD, which is where Mark was actually a police officer a few years prior to me, Mark ended up with the state police, but he started off in Darien. So that's how I knew about Darien's testing. And I was offered a job at Westmont PD, which is right next door to Darien, at the same time. And quite honestly, Jason, I was really torn on where to go to. I did not want to follow in my brother's footsteps. I did not want to be in his shadow. if you will. I had no qualms with my brother. I just didn't, I wanted to blaze my own trail. And so I was really starting to lean towards Westmont. I had a discussion with Mark and some other people, and Mark tells me, he says, you'll make your own trail, don't worry about me, you'll be fine, people are going to forget about me, and you're better off taking Darien. So I ended up going to Darien.
So describe the Darien Police Department for me.
When I got hired in '85, I was the 19th police officer that was hired. I believe our population was probably, 15,000 people then, 12,000, 15,000. It wasn't really that big at that time. And Darien, Illinois is located in the southeast section of DuPage County, right along Interstate 55, and we're about 18 miles west of Chicago. So, again, small little community, middle-class community, very nice neighborhood, bedroom community, if you will. So, but probably by the time I ended up leaving, there were, in 2019, we were up to 35 police officers, 23,000 population, and about 7 square miles. So it had developed quite a bit in that time.
So you get hired by the Darien Police Department. Where do you go to the police academy, and what was that like?
So when I got hired by Darien, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when you go around and take all these tests with these places, you start seeing a lot of the same people. And there was one guy who I kept seeing everywhere I was going. He was a tall, lanky, black-haired guy, and it got to the point there, you get into it, you start giving the head nod to these guys, like, oh, you again, you didn't get hired either, huh? And you're kind of, who each other, you recognize each other. So when I got hired by Darien, they sent me down to PTI, which is the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois in Champaign. So I went down there in August, and I got hired with another guy, Bob Hughes. We got hired together. We drove down together, and as we're walking into Bromley Hall, where they store all the cadets resided, who's coming out of Bromley Hall, but this tall, lanky, black-haired guy who turned out to be Brian Cunningham. And Brian Cunningham, he took a job with, at the time, Burr Ridge. He ended up in Naperville. He did very well for himself. He was very well liked. And he ended his career about a year ago as chief of Woodridge Police Department, which is, again, down by the southeast, part of DuPage County. But Brian and I have been friends ever since, and he really had a good career.
So you complete the academy. Any stories from the academy?
There were there's a lot of, it was a good time. I mean, it was my first time away, quite frankly. And so again, it's the college atmosphere because you're on the University of Illinois campus and school's back in session. So I think when our class was done, I believe the academy probably changed some rules on curfew and what time you had to be at, PT in the morning and out. So I'm sure some changes were made. But I remember one story. There was we had a curfew of midnight, and we used to go to the bars every night, go out drinking, and it was probably about a 10-minute walk, 5-minute walk from the bars back to our dorm. And there was one guy who he was with DeKalb County, a good guy, funny guy. He felt he was leaving the bars too soon, so he brought his bicycle down in an effort so he can leave the bars a little bit later and ride from the bars back to Bromley Hall. He shows up one day at PT in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he's all scarred up and scratched up, and turns out he ran into an open sewer and flipped his bike and got a little road rash on his bike. But it was a real good class that we had, and a lot of funny people, a lot of good stories down there. So it was really a good time I had down there.
So you complete the academy and you report to Darien PD, excuse me, as a full-time sworn officer. What are your first memories?
My first memory is how open and how nice they were. Like I said, Bob Hughes and I went down to the academy, and whatever it was, August, whatever day the academy started down there. We had just gotten hired, and one of the patrol officers there, his name is Frank Jackowick. he owned a house in Darien, and he had an open lot next to his house. And every summer he would have a beach party. He would bring in a bunch of sand, filled his lot with sand, and he would host a big summertime party for the police department and their spouses and their families and stuff. I didn't know anybody in Darien other than my brother at the time. I knew one or two guys, and he reached out, invited Bob and I to this party. They never met us. They didn't know who we were, but he invited us to this party where everybody else was, and it just seemed like I'm in the right place. I mean, these guys are open, they're nice, they're having a party, and this is a good opportunity to meet a lot of these guys, and you see them in a different atmosphere. It was a good group of people. I mean, really nice guys and very welcoming, and more than happy to take, they were willing to take me under their wing and help me do the best I could.
So what was field training like for you?
My field training officer was Dave Scala, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later. But field training back at that time was, I believe, 10 weeks, and you'd stay with the same FTO the whole time. And it was a lot of driving around and a lot of the same thing. It certainly was not as structured and as thorough as it is now, or as it was when I left. Anyway, I mean, you're up to 16 weeks, and it was a whole totally different, revamped and different process for the training that our department went to.
Can you walk me through a timeline of your career? How did you progress through the ranks?
Being a patrolman, again, I believe the first step I took was when I became a detective, and I'll be lying to you, Jason, I don't remember how deep I was into it. It was probably around 8-10 years into it where I got into detectives, and back at that time there were 3 of us in the detective bureau, and you would do a 4-year stint and just cycle out. So I did my time in detectives. You learn a lot in detectives. It's far different than patrol. So I took advantage of that, and I had a good opportunity there. After detectives, I accepted or became a field training officer, which I really enjoyed that. That was really one of the highlights of my career, quite frankly. I enjoyed being part of the development of the police department, training these recruits and hoping and trying to get them to make the process and be good police officers. I really enjoyed that part. And then from being an FTO, I eventually got into the SWAT team with Fiat SWAT, where that was all created, and that again was another one of the highlights of my career, being part of the Fiat teams that we had out there, and that whole SWAT cadre was a real good. I felt it was a real good mix of people from all different agencies. And what Fiat was, it was an acronym for Felony Investigative Assistance Team, which would pretty much, the purpose of Fiat was for a lot of our smaller agencies, which existed out in that southeast part of DuPage County. There were several small agencies that if something major happened, there's no way that a Darien can handle it because we didn't have enough people or the resources. So a lot of those municipalities got together to create these multi-jurisdictional team, hence the name of Fiat. And so a lot of jurisdictions were part of that Fiat contingent. It was a lot of good guys, a lot of committed guys to law enforcement, a lot of guys that really wanted to train and be better and really have a positive impact on law enforcement and be a real asset to DuPage County where we were at. So I was real happy and proud to be a part of that. Shortly after that, I got promoted to sergeant in, again, early 2000s. That was an awakening. I always picture being a patrolman. I see my patrol sergeants over there. You never thought they did anything. Seemed like they just sit at their desk and do nothing until you're that guy and you realize how busy they are and all the paperwork and all the administrative details you got to that. So that was kind of an eye-opening to me, but again, I enjoyed that position I was in, to be able to hopefully mentor or teach and work with people to, again, get them in the right direction and just keep on, making Darien a good place that people want to work and improving the police department. From sergeant, I eventually became a commander. I was selected as a commander just about 4 years before the end of my career. So about 2015-ish, I was promoted to commander, where I worked closely with our chief at that time, and I learned a ton from the chief at the time was Greg Thomas, who came to us from Aurora, Illinois. I learned a ton from him. He's a real smart guy. He's a numbers guy, and I appreciate the knowledge he shared with me. I was happy to end my career that way.
So you spent a significant amount of time of your career in patrol and as a sergeant in patrol, and the lion's share of the work is traffic. Is there a particular traffic stop or traffic stops that stand out in your mind when you look back at your career?
So once I was off of FTO and I was on my first day on my own, the very first traffic stop I made was for speeding. So I stopped this woman for speeding, and turns out that her license is suspended. So get her out of the car, start talking to her, and I tell her she's going to be arrested for the suspended, and she starts hitting me with this, you don't know who you're messing with, I'm going to take your badge, I'm going to sue you, you're going to lose your job. And the whole time, it's my first day, I'm thinking, holy crap, man, what the hell am I doing here? I'm going to lose my job over a traffic stop. It was really, she was saying a lot of stuff to me that I was believing. And my supervisor showed up, and he's like, "No, she's full of shit. Don't worry about it. She was a regular in town," which I didn't know at the time because I was still new. But she was a regular, and that's just how she played it all the time. But that was kind of a rude awakening for me, that first stop, and it's right out of the blocks. It's somebody who's trying to, supposedly take my job. And but I realized as time went on that I heard that line quite a bit. So, and it never came to fruition. So that's a good thing.
What about incidents? Any incidents that you responded to, whether as a patrol officer or a detective?
Well, there's a lot there. So again, let me go back to literally my first day on the job when I got out of the FTO program. It was my first day on the job out of the academy. I was on midnight shift, and my FTO was off that night. It was a Sunday night, and so I was assigned to the patrol sergeant that night, and that was pretty much just going to be a ride along because he wasn't my FTO and whatever. So we're out there driving around. He's just showing me some things, and we get this call for a domestic. And again, I don't know what that means. I came from I came from Park Ridge. I never heard about that kind of stuff. My family wasn't like that. I didn't see that kind of stuff in my family. I didn't see that stuff with my friends and stuff. I had no idea what a domestic was. So we pull up to this house, and it's a young couple, and he had slept around pretty nicely. She had obvious marks and bruises on her, and she was crying, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Since when do men beat up women? I just didn't. It was kind of an eye opener for me that stuff like this happens in a town like Darien. I just didn't understand it. And back then in '85, the domestic rules or laws were so much different. Your typical, okay, ma'am, you want to sign a complaint? No, I don't want to sign a complaint. Everything's fine. Well, we leave. Nobody gets arrested, nothing, and it didn't take too much longer before we get another call to go back there. This time he's gone, and she got beat again because she called us the first time. So she got beat even worse this time. Same thing. You want anything done? No, it'll be worse. And it just didn't make any sense to me how we just leave and not do anything. And I just couldn't believe that this guy would slap his girlfriend around. Like I said, it was just one of those things that I didn't come up that way. I just didn't see it. And it was really an eye-opener to me at that particular time. And unfortunately that was the first call I ever had. And so it's in my memory that way. So that's all.
Any cases that you investigated that stand out in your mind, or any other incidents?
As far as big cases, I don't nothing really sticks out to me as far as a big case that I had when we were back there. If I can, and I'm not sure this is where you're going, but another story if I could. Being on the job less than 2 years. It was July of 1987, and I was working midnights, and on my shift with me was Bob, the guy I got hired with, and another officer who just got hired, had about a year on, Gerry. He'd been on about a year. Our supervisor at that particular time was working the power shift. Well, the power shift ended at 2 o'clock in the morning. So he leaves at 2 o'clock, and he literally leaves me in charge. So I got less than 2 years on the job, and he leaves me in charge with another 2 guys that have less time than I, or had the same amount of less time than I do. So between the 3 of us, we had about 5 years on the job. And before he's leave, he's telling me, Gerald, don't worry about it. It's a Darien, nothing happens here. It's a weeknight. Nothing going on, you'll be fine. Something happens, just call me, but you'll be fine, don't worry about it. So he leaves, driving around, I hear this ISPER message, which is the Illinois State Police Emergency Radio Network, again, which is what would happen is if there's an alert kind of through a jurisdiction, like an emergency message that need to be put out, it would come out through this ISPER platform to have a bigger spread to it so more people hear this message that's going on. And I'm just driving around and I hear this message come out of Joliet that they're looking for a guy for attempted murder. It's Joliet. They're 20 miles away from us. I just didn't bother me. I wasn't really too worried about it. So a little bit after 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm having coffee with Gerry, and we're sitting there having coffee, just talking about what it's like and all this kind of stuff. And lo and behold, we get this call for an armed robbery at our Shell gas station right at Canine 55. Well, Greg and I are having coffee a block away, and we look at each other like, what the hell, man? So we start heading down there, and lo and behold, he takes one driveway, I take another driveway, and there he is. He's got a shotgun pointed at the attendant's head. He's walking him out, and he sees us pull in. He jumps into his car and starts taking off. And the whole time I've been trying to get my shotgun out, and back in that day we stored our shotguns in a gunny sack on the floor. So you're trying to get it out while you're driving, it's below your feet, trying to pull this thing out. It's just really not working well. So he jumps in his car and takes off, and Greg and I go out after him. He tries to get back on I-55, which is right next to the Shell station. He tries to get back on I-55, and I'm right behind him, and he ditches his car. He loses control of his car, and he's off into the berm. And it happened so fast that I didn't have time to separate. So I literally was probably about 40, 50 feet away from him when he's in the bank. Unfortunately, I'm on the driver's side, which is, again, he's on my side. So I could not get out my passenger side because I had all my gear over there, and there's no way I was going to crawl across my passenger seat. So I was able to get my shotgun free, and I'm crawling out my driver's side door, and he's getting out his door. As I'm exiting my door, he's coming out his. He's got the shotgun leveled at me, and he's 30 feet from me. And he's got that shotgun leveled at me. I level my shotgun at him, and I'm just yelling at him, get on the ground, get on there, because I'm trying to go around my car. And after the whole event happened, I had several people ask me, how come I didn't shoot him? How come I didn't shoot him? And it was just kind of, I didn't think I had to. I mean, I know I could have. I know I would have been within my right to do that. I just didn't feel that he wanted to shoot me. I mean, because if he wanted to shoot me, he would have shot me. I was clearly within his range, and I had no cover. He clearly could have shot me if he wanted to. And I just didn't feel he was going to do that. And so as I got around cover to the other side of my squad car, by this time, I'm on ISPER, I'm having dispatch get more people. I'm trying to get help through ISPER, and the cavalry comes, and there's more cops than I can imagine coming to help me, and it's greatly appreciated. But the unfortunate thing was, because we're on the ramp, we're on the cloverleaf I-55, we created a crossfire where there were guys all around, and we were pretty much really limited or reduced our option to take a shot if we had to, because there were so many officers on that semicircle, it created a problem. Him and I were negotiating, yelling at him, get on the ground, drop it, get on the ground. And the whole time he's just walking around, he's drinking a beer, waving that shotgun around, pointing it up in the air. And when I exited my car, I did not close my driver's side door. My car was still running. He starts walking towards my car, and with that gun, you know, he's got the gun in the air, he's not level at him, he's got the gun in the air, and I'm yelling at him, get on the ground, get on the ground. The whole time I'm thinking, he's gonna jump into my fucking car. And what am I gonna do when he steals my car? And I'm thinking he's gonna steal my car. Well, he turns around, starts walking back, and he throws his gun down, and he drops his pants, and he moons me. And right at that point, I said, he's probably got no weapons anymore. So there were some other coppers that, I don't remember who they were, but were in pretty close proximity. That was like the go sign, where we just jumped on this guy and got him into custody, took him into custody. And again, had no idea who this guy was until a District 5 trooper came up to me and said, you know who you got there? I said, I have an idea. Who is that? He says, that's who Joliet's looking for the attempted homicide. Okay, no problem. And that, I mean, it was just a crazy time. And again, you know, having 3 guys there with such almost no experience having this happen was, I mean, I don't think I slept for days after it all happened, just how wound up I was and how full of adrenaline it was after all that happened. So I'll never forget that.
So have you, now it all worked out perfect in the end, but have you ever looked back at that call and said, man, I wish I would have done this a little different, I wish I would have done that a little different?
I think the one part that I learned of, and I know you had one of your previous interviews talk about this, is back at the station, once he was in custody and we were back at the station and all these investigators were coming in to help do the investigation. And again, this is where Fiat was activated, and we had investigators coming in to try to talk to people and piece this whole thing together. One of the other investigators who I knew was in another local jurisdiction, he wasn't one of our guys, but he was a local jurisdiction. Again, I had less than 2 years, and this particular investigator been on the job a long time, much older than I was, gets me into a different room and starts questioning me about my actions and what I did out there. And I'm just like, what's going on here? I mean, I just kind of felt uncomfortable about it. And this one of my sergeants, Ron Campo, comes up to me at the time, grabs me and says, don't talk to him, get out of here, let's go. So he removes me and takes me away from that. And that shut that whole thing down. And I later come to learn, again, having that discussion with Sergeant Campo, is that probably wasn't a good idea for me to start talking to him. Again, I have nothing to hide. I mean, I felt comfortable in what I did, and I had nothing to hide, but it's just one of those that it's like you felt the table was turned on the wrong person. Like I said, being a little bit older and wiser, you think about that, and it really kind of haunts me off, quite frankly. But, you know, I got pulled out of it, and I learned a great lesson from that. And so that's kind of the part I wish I was better informed about that, or smarter. And I know that's been taught, and so that's one thing I wish I was a little bit smarter about on that.
So you spent a good portion of your career on that SWAT team. Are there any activations or incidents or stories that you can think of from your time with SWAT?
I remember one that and I don't remember the details where we were at or what that whole what it was, but I remember I was on the taser, and I think it was a hostage barricade, and I was on the taser, and we were on, the team I was with was on one of the windows, and we had ported the window, and it was in a bedroom, and he had a knife. The subject had a knife and waving around, and that was the whole big thing. And negotiations didn't quite work, and it wasn't going well, and he's in there, and he knows we're in this window, and he's threatening people. The whole thing is going on with it, so the decision was made to try to tase this guy to get him where we can breach the door, get in, and get him into custody. But he's on the bed, and he's got this knife, and he's close enough to the window where, you know, he's making these movements and stuff, and I end up just hitting him with the taser, and he falls onto the knife. And at that particular time, I mean, I had this feeling come over me like, holy shit, man, I hope and pray he did not land on that knife, because that would really be a bad thing. And God was watching out for me, man. He did. This guy did not. He landed on the knife, but not where it inflicted injury on him. And that was again another big lesson. Is like I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to be doing that again anytime soon. And it again, a lesson well learned.
So I think there's a couple incidents where you touched on this next question a little bit, but was there ever in your career, was there ever something that you did and you were like, that just wasn't a good idea?
Aside from that one, there was an incident went up, and I know, and Darien's it's not a big town, and our patrol officers we do have a union, and our patrol officers were unionized. We in the police department felt that things were not going our way, and we had a mayoral election coming up, and we felt some tensions going on, and we felt this was our opportunity to try to make a difference on that election. We as a union decided to get involved in that election. We made that decision to voice our support towards the other candidate. Unfortunately, our candidate did not win, and that turned out to be a huge mistake. It did not end well for us. Obviously, the current mayor and the one who won, they all knew what we did. There was no hiding it, and the next several years where it was not a happy place to work. The morale had really gone down. And there were a lot of things that were happening that we couldn't help but attribute to making that decision to get to wading into that pool of politics and putting our support behind somebody, and that just wasn't a good decision. We just made a mistake on that.
So when you look back over the course of your career, what are some of your best memories?
Early on in my career, when I got to see, again, I was a young 20-something. I wasn't married, hadn't had any kids at that time. So early 20s, couple years on the job, I was on day shift, we get a call for a woman in labor. And at that time, Darien was covered by 3 fire protection districts, and it just so happened is where this woman lived, that fire district was on-call voluntary, which usually means you're going to be a little bit slower because they got to send out the bat signal and get all these people to the firehouse and get them over to us and all that. So it took a little longer. So the other officer, myself, he was the officer in charge at the time, Tom Ruby, and I will never, this is another one I'll never forget. And so we get there, and the woman is clearly in labor, screaming. The husband is out in like a living room. She's in the bedroom. He's in like the family room, living room, all nervous, and I get it. He's smoking like a chimney. He's out there, oh my God, you got to help my wife, So Tom and I are doing what we can to, again, make her comfortable, try to calm her down. You know, the baby had already started to crown, and we're like, man, I hope these guys hurry up. Hope the medics hurry up, because, again, I'd never seen anything like that. So the medics get there at the nick of time where we're helping deliver the baby. The medics come in and they do whatever they do to deliver the baby safely, and healthy. It was a good delivery, and they clean the baby up, get the baby wrapped up, and Tom takes the baby and walks out to the dad in the living room and says, hey, you want to hold your child? And the whole time, like I said, this guy had been smoking. So Tom can smell the smoke on the guy, and the person takes the baby, and Tom's like, you been smoking? He said, oh yeah, I'm just so nervous. I'm a nervous wreck. I can't believe this happened. He says, give me that baby back. I'm not going to expose the baby to that nicotine. And he walks back into the bedroom, and I'm just looking at him saying, did you really just do that, Tom? But he, so that again, that's one of them that's stuck on my mind, and there's been some tragic events that have been in my mind. I mean, I remember my first fatal car wreck. I remember that one. That was a young lady who a gentleman had crossed a double yellow, hit her head on. It was a snowstorm, crossed a double yellow, hit her head on, killed her, and she was pregnant as well, killed a baby as well. There's a lot of horrible stories or unpleasant stories in here. And I'll be honest with you, Jason, I try to remember the positive ones. I like to remember the positive ones, but there are a lot of unfortunate events that happen. That's, I guess, the nature of the beast. So
is there someone that, whether they knew it or not, was a mentor to you, or maybe you wanted to emulate the way that they did the job?
I'll say there's two people. As far as job related, as I mentioned earlier, my brother Mark, because he's my older brother. My brother Mark was a Darien police officer first. He was with Darien for like 5 years. He was there several years before I got old enough and took the job. He'd always wanted to be a police officer. He always wanted to be a state trooper. So he did his time at Darien, which I think was like 5 years, ended up getting hired by the Illinois State Police. So he went on to the Illinois State Police, and he did 30 years with them, about 30 years with them, and had a real good career with them. Went up to the level of deputy director. He did very well for himself, and I'm very proud of Mark. And a little sidebar that, if I could, because he was still at the state police and they all knew him, and I'd mentioned earlier about not wanting to be in his shadow, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it, you burn your own trail." Well, he was full of crap. So, because it was Darien and he spent a lot of time that way, people knew my brother. They knew Mark. And so as you're out there, you start to meet other members from law enforcement agencies, and especially as you get more in the administrative ranks, you start to meet some of those administrative type people. It just seemed like every time, "Hey, Gerry Piccoli, nice to meet you." "Hey, you Mark's brother? You Mark's brother?" I kept hearing this "you Mark's brother" stuff, and it made me keep thinking of the Brady Bunch, where you have Marcia and Jan, and Jan's like, "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia." It's always about Marcia. Well, I kept hearing about Mark, but I guess if you think about it, the big picture of that is, it could have been a lot worse. They could have said, well, he's really kind of an asshole, but that's not what it was. It was always very positive. He's a good guy, great guy. I love working for him, this kind of thing. So he really, law enforcement was good to Mark, and I really believe that Mark was good for law enforcement. He did a real nice job with that. I'm very proud of him. And Dave Scala. Dave Scala was my FTO when I got out of the academy. And him and I just hit it off. And, Dave likes to tell the story that when my brother was at Darien PD and Dave got hired by Darien PD, Mark was Dave's FTO. And so now Dave is my FTO. So, but Dave, again, he was a smart guy, he by the book kind of guy, very knowledgeable. He was, he became deputy chief eventually, and he was just, I really appreciated how he did the work, how he dealt with people, how he talked to people. So he was somebody I really looked up to, and I really appreciated how he helped me along in my career, as well as other people in her career. I really consider Dave, again, he's one of my close friends, and he was definitely, without a doubt, one of my mentors, no doubt about it.
So what's one of the biggest changes that you saw, whether it was at the Darien Police Department or in law enforcement altogether, over the course from the time that you started till the time that you retired?
I think some of the changes are, at least nowadays, is technology's got to be probably one of the biggest. And that, when I got hired, we had CBs in our cars, and you had one or two radios, and that was about it, and no cameras, none of that kind of stuff. So, reports were all handwritten on, triplicate and all that kind of business. So that the advancements in technology have been great for law enforcement. I mean, whether it's, through communications or just being able to be gather data, to have that at a fingertip, has been huge for law enforcement. No doubt about it. The ability to share information has been a huge benefit for law enforcement. The change in weapons and to hopefully try to, I don't know anybody who carries shotguns anymore. Maybe they still do, other than a beanbag. But it's just the advancements in technology and firearms, as whether it's taser, OC, to try to minimize, to try to minimize the impact of that and hopefully reduce the resistance and have a positive outcome if somebody is resisting, where people aren't getting shot all the time. So I think that's a huge advancement to law enforcement, no doubt about it.
Do you think the job had an impact on your family?
Absolutely. My immediate family, like I said, when I was a younger kid and trying to decide what I wanted to do, my parents knew I was angling towards business, and I started to lean towards that law enforcement side. And my mom, I love my mother, and thank God she's still with us, but she was of the opinion the reason why I was leaning towards law enforcement was because of good old my big brother Mark. And I said, no, that's really not it. I kind of liking this law enforcement thing. It seems interesting to me. And I think even after I've been on the job for a long time, I still thought she probably thought I was going to quit one day and be an accountant or something. And it just never happened. So I'm not saying I disappointed my mother. I'm sure that wasn't it, but I don't think that the career path I chose was the one that she probably would have wanted for me. But it worked out well for me. And as far as the family I'm in now, my wife and my kids, there's no doubt it impacted them, and I wish I would have noticed that sooner and been more aware of it. My wife Amy is wonderful. She, the support that she's shown me, and again, it's not always easy being married to a cop with, the holidays, the days off, the schedules, the instances they see, and that's not easy for people. And in my case, I had a bad habit of shutting my family out, and I didn't, the funny stories I would share with them, but the bad stories or the bad events, I kept that inside. I did not want to make them part of that. I didn't want that to impact them. That was not their problem. And so that being quiet and keeping things in really had a breakdown on my communications with my wife, and that just isn't good. I mean, and that's one thing. You talk about advancements in law enforcement. I guess I'll dovetail into that. It's the way you see it now, where a lot of agencies have, or the resources available to law enforcement nowadays who are struggling, having, post-traumatic stress, or just have a bad situation or a debrief or de-stress. I think that's wonderful, because you keep stuff boiled in, you keep stuff locked inside, it's not going to end well for you. And the ability to talk to people and communicate and feel comfortable doing that is critical. I think that's hugely important, and I'm glad to see the advancements in that. But I was lucky to make it through my career. I, married to the same woman, and once I retired, much happier, and things are good, and we worked through it. It wasn't easy, but we worked through it.
Looking back at your career, and maybe you don't, but do you have any regrets?
Like I said, I wish I was probably more open with, like I said, I talked more and was more open with my wife about some of that stuff, or somebody, not necessarily her, because like I said before, I really didn't want to burden people or bring them into my issues. And so I probably should have talked to people more, or at least taken advantage of that process to it. I wish we wouldn't have gotten involved, like I talked a little bit before, with that whole getting into the politics of it. I realize that the law enforcement community is probably one of the most political entities out there because they're so visible. Everybody knows who the police are. You got a uniform and a squad car. They know you're part of the government. You're so visible, and it's just, you can't help but have people complain or bring it up or say stuff to you. But we never should have done that. We should have remained silent on that and just stay away from that. And so those are a couple, two big things that stick out. And I'm sure there's other ones out there that I probably didn't handle things right, or I may have said stuff that I probably can't take back, or do stuff with people out there, but it's time to move on, that's all.
So how did you arrive at the decision that it was time for you to retire?
Back before I became a commander, I was a sergeant for many years, and like I briefly touched on before, when we got involved in politics, the union got involved in politics, I'm not saying this was the final straw, but this was kind of the writing that we saw on the wall. Our current chief at that time was out. He left. The police department, and Dave Scala at the time was the deputy chief, and we had all hoped or planned that he would be the next chief. I mean, Dave, he worked very hard for it. He earned that. It wasn't a thing that he was entitled to it just because he was a deputy chief. That had nothing to do with it. He had earned that spot. He should have had that spot. But I think because of our involvement, the choice was made to kind of eliminate or reduce any affiliation with that. Try to do a clean slate and let's start all over. So they brought somebody in from the outside, and he was a retired CPD guy. He was a retired Chicago Police Department guy, and that just didn't. My view is it just didn't go well for the police department. I'd go to conferences, I'd see other people, other law enforcement type people. You talk to them and say, "Hey, I heard you guys hired so-and-so," and it says, "Yeah, we did," and it was like a running joke the whole time. I mean, I never found anybody in the law enforcement side that really had a shining glow of this individual. It was always kind of negative, and nice enough guy, just a whole different attitude or different perspective on policing, and that really created a morale issue by us at the police department. And once it starts going down, it gets really hard to get out of that tailspin. Him and I had our shares of button heads, and usually when a sergeant butts heads with the chief, it usually doesn't end well for the sergeant. And I was really struggling. I wasn't quite of age or had time yet. I still had, my wife was still working, and I had one son still in college. I couldn't just leave. As much as I wanted to leave, I just couldn't leave. And I would just hope that, maybe a year or two down the line, something would change. So I muddled through it. I tried to tamp down my attitude towards the chief, because it was affecting me a lot more than it was affecting him, quite frankly. So I knew that wasn't a good way to do business. And a couple years into it, he got called back to the Chicagoland area to take another position. So he went back and took another position back in, I think it was with Cook County. Took a position there, and I felt kind of a sigh of relief, quite frankly. And They ended up bringing in, and by that time, Dave Scale had already retired because he just could not. There was no reason for him to stick around. He wasn't going to stick around, see what happened. So he ended up retiring. They brought in another chief from the outside. He had just retired from the Aurora, Illinois Police Department, and Greg Thomas. Great guy. I mean, I worked with him. Again, he brought me up as a commander. He had the faith and trust in me to have that position. Had a great working relationship with him. He taught me a lot of stuff. He was a very data-driven, nerdy kind of a guy, if you will, but he knew his business, and I learned a lot from him. I enjoyed working with him and for him, and it just got to the point where, again, I was 55 years old. I didn't know how long I was going to be there, and I didn't want to be there when I was 60. It's a young man's game, and I think it was time for me to move on and let somebody else maybe bring some fresh ideas or get different ideas. Let somebody else have the opportunity. And I just didn't know when to have that happen. I know I wanted to have it happen, I just wasn't sure when. And I remember being at a conference, and I talked to this other chief about retirement, and he said something to me that I'll never forget. He says, "Gerry, you're just going to know. You'll wake up one day and you will know it's time to leave." And that's exactly what happened. And I was out there looking for a job, and it just so happened I got to the point like I just can't. I just have to leave. And it just so happened that was the same time I got the phone call for this second job, and it just the stars lined up for me, and I got out, and that was 5 years ago. So,
do you miss being a cop?
I miss parts of it. I don't miss the the administrative stuff, if you will. But it's funny you say that, because I was my son went to college in one of my sons went to college in Indiana, and we were going down to visit him. There was some event going on at the college that we were going down, and his grandparents, my in-laws, we were driving down there, and we're on 8094 and getting into Indiana, and these Indiana state troopers blow our doors off. Lights and sirens just fly by. And my father-in-law turns to me and says, "You miss it?" And I said, "That part, I miss. That was the fun part. That was the fun part. Interacting with people, the everyday people, helping people out. That was the fun part. The administrative stuff, it was more boring. It wasn't as sexy, and that part I don't miss. I miss a lot of the guys that I came up with and the gals that I came up with. I mean, I spent 34 years with these people, Jason. I mean, they've seen the worst of me and the best of me, and we've been through some bad times and some good times. And yeah, some of those people I miss, no doubt about it.
What are you doing now?
The job I took, I was lucky enough to land a job with a company called Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. They are the largest distributor of wine and spirits in the U.S. And I am the director of security for the state of Illinois for that company. So it is a wonderful company. It's good people I work with, and it's totally different. I know it's all security, and there are some nuances that are the same, but it's totally different when I got out of the whole public government sector, going into a private sector in such a large company as Southern is. It just a total 180 from where I came from. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just totally different, and I really enjoy it. It's been a good 5 years.
Do you have any advice, whether it's for someone that's considering becoming a police officer, someone who's at the midpoint in their career, or someone who's thinking about retiring?
But I think if you're going into it, I think you need to do your research and better have your eyes wide open. And like I said, everything I learned in the academy, or just talking to people before I actually got on the job and jumped into that job, you have a perception of what it's like until you get that first domestic, and you don't. I mean, like I said, I didn't realize that this kind of stuff happens out here. You see a lot of bad stuff that you just didn't realize happens, even in bedroom communities. I mean, it's everywhere. So I think you need to educate yourself and go in with your eyes wide open. That you're gonna. It was a great job. I would not have changed a thing. But there were a lot of bad parts of the job. You see people at their worst, and you deal with some of the worst situations, and that impacts people. And so feel free. I mean, if you feel it, you need to talk to people. Have an out. Going to a local tavern at 7 o'clock in the morning, have a couple of beers and talk about something with another copper is not always the best way to go. Sometimes you need some professional people to help you. So, and I would say have a plan for maybe not in the beginning, but as you get closer to retirement. It took me a long time. I mean, I was looking at the job market for quite some time. Plan ahead. I mean, when you wake up and you want to retire and you haven't found a job yet, and if your plan is to still work, you need to start that process much earlier, because it takes a little while. I mean, it just doesn't happen overnight. So if you're going to retire, by all means, just plan ahead, start looking early. And I just want to say, last but not least, is you are your brother's keeper. You really need to watch out for each other in more ways than one. If you see your partner, fellow officer struggling, reach out to them. If you see they're making bad mistakes and you follow the rules and follow the guidelines, you see them going down the wrong path, grab them by the collar. I mean, we've all seen videos nowadays, and I guess that's a great thing about technology. We learn from some of these things, but you see technology nowadays, you see some of these police officers making decisions, and you're sitting there scratching your head thinking, what am I missing? How did he come up with that decision to do that? And why is his partner not grabbing him by the collar? How can this happen? And you are your brother's keeper. We need to watch out for each other. It's like I said, it was a great career. It was a great brotherhood. It is a great brotherhood. I know of no other occupation like it, where you put that uniform on, you have that automatic trust with your fellow law enforcement officer that I don't know what other occupation has that. I mean, people I never met. Perfect example is I was talking about earlier about the armed robbery. People I never even met were willing to come help me and put their life on the line to help me and help get the bad guy. That's overwhelming, but that's how we all act, and I'm proud of that, and I'm glad there are people like that willing to do that. That's good for society.
Gerry, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Jason.